Well, good morning, church. Hey, we're going to be in chapter 11 of Hebrews this morning, if you want to go ahead and get turned there. If you missed last week, let me catch you up, because what we talked about last week is pretty pertinent to this week. Last week, we saw that Jesus, as our great high priest, sat down. That he sat down because his work as high priest was completed. In other words, the atonement, the total atonement for man's sin has been completed. That past sins, current sins, future sins have all been paid for on the cross. Jesus did that on the cross. And so in doing that, he also set aside the old covenant. He set it aside. And so he, in turn, has given us a greater, new covenant with God. And so we don't claim any of the old covenant promises. Those were made to the nation of Israel, to the people of Israel, and we're not them. So we no longer claim those promises. They weren't made to us. What we're going to talk about this morning is that we have a new, better promise. It's really an ancient, old promise. So there is an Old Testament promise that we do claim, that even today we still claim it. And it wasn't made to you, but it applies to you. It wasn't made to you, but it applies to you. And it is God's promise to Abraham that through him, all the peoples of the world would be blessed because of what happened through Abraham's lineage, that through his descendants, all people would be blessed. It wasn't fulfilled in the Old Covenant. It was actually fulfilled 2,000 years later when a king was born in Bethlehem. And so that's going to be the focus of our talk this morning. So the writer of Hebrews reminds his readers of that promise because they're wondering. Remember, the recipients of this letter were Hebrew Christians that were under persecution. They were undergoing hard times. And so in the midst of their hard times, it would have been really easy to wonder, where is God for me? Where is he in the midst of these troubles? And so the writer of Hebrews writes chapter 11 to them and now to us as well to answer that question for us. Is God with us? Is God for us? And so for those Hebrew believers, the old covenant was their assurance because they had the temple where God's presence dwelt. They had the sacrifices that were a symbol that sin was atoned for, that God was with them and was for them. But now that all of that has been set aside, they need some new assurances. And so for chapter 11 to make sense, we have to go back just to the tail end of chapter 10, and we'll start there. So Hebrews 10:39 says, "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved." And so the writer is encouraging them. He's saying, hey, don't shrink back. Don't surrender your faith. Don't be like the people who stop meeting together, because that's the first step towards walking away from your faith, is when you stop meeting together with other believers. But he says, we're not part of those people, which begs the question, right? Well, which people are we part of? And so he tells us, we are people of faith. We're people of faith. And so chapter 11 is all about what that means to us. So in 11, verses 1 through 3, here's what he wrote. "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." So God created everything from nothing. And so faith is not just a current state. It's not what helps you process what's happening in the here and now. It also informs the past, that you look back and in faith you understand what happened all the way back to the very, very beginning, that God created everything from nothing. And so faith affects what lies ahead as well as what is behind us. Through faith, through the lens of faith, we look at what was behind us. We look at what's happening now, and we also look to the future through the lens of faith. And so this next part of chapter 11 is probably what most of us, I think, is familiar with in chapter 11. It's called the Hall of Faith. And it is just a really long list of people who lived by faith. I mean, that's basically what all of chapter 11 is about. So have you ever wondered, why do we need a whole chapter of people who live by faith? I mean, it seems like overkill, right? It's like, okay, couple paragraphs, cool. Maybe 5 or 6 people, we get the point. But it is an entire chapter devoted to people who lived by faith. And I think the reason why it's in there is because, for the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the Greek or Alexandrian influence on Hebrews at this time, people who were Jewish, okay? Some lived in Jerusalem, capital of Judaism, but the rest of them lived out in what we would call the world. the rest of the world, right? Influenced by Greek culture, Roman culture. We saw that in several chapters ago where he said the covenant and the temple were but shadows of what is in heaven. That's a nod to Plato's philosophy, that what happens here is just a shadow in the spiritual world, right? This is fake. What's really happening is in the spiritual world. Now, the writer of Hebrews wasn't saying that about the temple here. He was saying, hey, the temple was good. There were good things that came out of the old covenant, but that has now been put aside. And so I think the writer of Hebrews is pushing back now here in this chapter against the Alexandrian influence in their thinking, right? So in the Greek culture and then in the Romans, the concept of faith was not something that was to be modeled. It was something to be mocked. And here's why. Think about, what happened in Greek culture. You had all those philosophers. So knowledge was really key. Being educated was big. You had the Library of Alexandria, which, it's gone now, unfortunately, but at the time was like this big depository of knowledge of man. It was man's crowning achievement when it came to knowledge. But for them, though, to the educated, faith, belief in what is unseen, was a state of mind for simple, uneducated people. That only simple, uneducated people could believe in something that is not seen. And that's what faith is. That's what the writer told us, right? It's faith in what we cannot see. And so for the Greeks and then the Romans, they're like, that's for simple people who don't know any better. And I would just tell you that way of thinking is still pretty prevalent today. Maybe you know some people like that. I need evidence. I need to see it. I can't believe in something that I can't see. Sounds good. I think those are myths. Those are stories. Show me the evidence, right? That you need to let your circumstances dictate what's really real. There's people who live that way. In that time, the Greeks and the Romans felt the same way, right? This common phrase was, if the gods will it, which really meant, I don't know if it's going to happen or not. We'll find out when it happens. And so for them, the idea that, hey, there's this thing that we can't see that dictates and guides my whole life, that I live my life based on something I can't see, was craziness. The fact that Hebrew and Christians were willing to suffer and die for their faith was astonishing to them. That people would be willing to give up their life here and now for something that is unseen. And yet that's exactly the kind of faith that the writer of Hebrews is praising. So in Hebrews 11, verse 4, we start the list of the hall of faith. Here's what he wrote. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he's dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who, this is the key part, earnestly seek him. It's not enough just to believe that God exists. He rewards those who earnestly seek him. Verse 7, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, remember it hadn't rained, right? And God's saying, hey, there's going to be a flood. What's that, God? You'll get it. Just build a boat, okay? In holy fear, built an ark to save his family. But by faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when he called to go to a place that he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, because he was really, really old, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. And so all these people were living by faith when they died. They didn't get to see the fulfillment of the promise. And so what is this promise that keeps getting mentioned? Who made the promise? Well, God made the promise to Abraham, right? And you might think, well, isn't God a promise keeper? We sing about that. Doesn't God keep his promises? And yes, he does keep his promises. But for these people, they woke up one day and they realized the promise is not going to come to me. The promise is going to come through me. In other words, in my life of faith, that I'm participating in the fulfillment of God's promises. It may not come to me, but it is coming through me. They knew that they just weren't recipients, they were participants in the promise. That there's a bigger plan and a bigger story that is playing out. It is God's story that he's been writing from the beginning and that is playing out year over year over year. And that's good perspective for us to keep in mind as well, that we aren't the end game. We are part of God's story. Jesus may come back tomorrow, or he may come back 1,000 years from now. We don't know. But we are living in God's story. It's not our story. We're just a part of the story. Verse 14. People who say such things show they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. And by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Heroes of the faith. They lived their lives by faith. And what kept them going was a promise that God had made to Abraham, that through him, through his descendants, the entire world would be blessed. And that's the promise that they were clinging to, even though most of them did not even see a sign that it was going to happen. Yet their faith was part of that promise. And if you know your Bible, right, their stories, the stories of these people who we say are heroes of the faith, you know their stories. It's all right there in the Old Testament. You know they were imperfect people. They had doubts along the way. They weren't just, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what happened, I'm going to believe in God. No, they had doubts, just like you and I will have doubts or have had doubts in the past. They stumbled along the way. They made mistakes. They wondered if God was really with them and for them. But they continued to live by faith. And so your doubts don't disqualify your faith. In fact, doubting sharpens and hones your faith. All of those people had doubts at one point or another in their life, and yet they came back to their faith. Every one of them continued to live by faith. Verse 23. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasure of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of a greater value than the treasures of Egypt. Now, wait a minute. Moses and Jesus weren't contemporaries. How did Moses figure that out? Because he knew he was part of a bigger story. He believed the promise. He was looking ahead, right? By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon and Barak, Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. And so we read this and we think, yes, Hall of Fame. I'm all about that. Give me some of that. Let me shut the mouths of lions. Let me defeat the flames. Give my weakness over to strength. I'm all about that. Give me that kind of faith, right? But wait, there's more. Verse 35. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. One race, two different outcomes. Two groups of people, each living by faith, running the same race, but yet two different outcomes. But the same thing was true. In the midst of their lives, they lived by faith. This last group of people were jeered, killed, tortured, destitute. They were mistreated. They had nothing. And then you see that little dash there before verse 38. It's almost as if the writer of Hebrews, as he was writing this, had to have a moment there, maybe wipe away a tear and say, the world was not worthy of them, of their faith. And they believed anyway. Some people's story ended in triumph. Some people's story ended in torture. But they all lived by faith. And we would ask why? What's the purpose? Verse 39. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And so what's true about both groups is that both walked by faith. On the mountaintop and in the valley, they walked by faith. When the good times were here, they were walking by faith. In the bad times, they were walking by faith. That despite their circumstances, they understood that they were part of a bigger story. They were part of God's story, the story that God was writing, even though none of them had received what God had promised to Abraham. The promise was not to us, but it is for us. And so you see it right there. God had planned something better for us, better for you and better for me. For all those who have accepted Jesus' invitation into the new covenant between God and the human race, there is something better. We're still called to walk by faith. We're still going to have mountaintop experiences and valley experiences. We may even endure some of the things that these people endured. But we have the promise that God has planned something better for us. And then he writes, and these ancient believers, they were doing something that had to do with us. It says, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And so God takes their story and your story. And unless Jesus comes back tomorrow, probably your children's story. He takes all of our stories and he's putting them together. And it's only in the unfolding of what he's doing in our lives and what he did in their lives that the plan is made perfect. That we begin to see this story that God is writing, that is unfolding over the centuries. It's only when you put together what God was doing with them and what God is doing with us that they would be made perfect, is what the writer writes. Now, perfect is the word teleos, but the root of it is the word teleo, okay, or tel, actually. And it's where we get our word for a telescope, okay? So tel means unfolding. It is a picture of something that is unfolding until it reaches an end. And it is this picture of this ancient telescope, okay? It's not really ancient. I got it on Amazon, but, you know, we don't use these anymore, so it's an ancient device. But it is unfolding, right? You don't get to see the whole picture unless this portion unfolds, and unless this portion unfolds, and unless this portion unfolds. And then when it's finally reached its end, you can see. And so he's telling us, hey, God's story is unfolding just like this telescope, a section at a time. And you're a part of it, and I'm a part of it, and they were a part of it. And again, unless Jesus comes back, our kids will be a part of it. And what's happening is that God is allowing us to see that he has something better planned for us. We just have to look. Hebrews 12, this is verse 1. Therefore, okay, so there's a therefore there. So what is that therefore? Since God has something better planned for us, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangled. In other words, since we have this backdrop of people who did not consider their hardship as God's absence, then let us, you and me, let us throw off anything that keeps us from running the race, that keeps us from living out a life that shows we believe that God has something better planned for us, that believe that Jesus is greater. He is better than anything this world has to offer. Because when you stop believing, it doesn't make your life better. It makes your life more complicated. Without faith, your life becomes infinitely more complicated. Back to verse 1, this is the last half of verse 1. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame. The literal translation of the word scorning there means he looked down. Not as in he was in an elevated position, although he was on the cross. It means he looked down in mockery of death. He looked death in the eye and said, "Is that all you got?" He scorned death. And then he sat down, having defeated death. And then the writer says, so let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. He's talking about the race of life that God has marked out for each one of us. And I just want to tell you, that race is not run on a track, okay? And you know that if you've lived some life. Because on a track, you've got a nice, smooth surface. There are lanes. People have to run in their lanes, right? There are turns or curves, but if it's on a nice track, they've banked the curves a little bit for you to make it just a little bit easier to get around the curve, right? To kind of ease you into that. Does that sound like life? No, hardly, right? The race of life that we run is like a road race. It's like the Tulsa Run. Anybody ever run in the Tulsa Run? Handful of people, okay? I did it in my much younger years, much younger years, okay? And I just want to tell you, it was brutal. You're running on the street with all of its imperfections, potholes, asphalt patches, slick spots. Some sections are downhill, some sections are uphill. It is not a track. It's not smooth running. You might be in the downhill stretch of your life, right? Maybe things are smooth for you right now. Job's good, family's good, relationships are good. And you might be tempted to take your eyes off of Jesus because honestly, you might feel like, what's the point? I got it made. Things are good. I'm not sure I need a Savior. And for others of you, you're slogging through the uphill section of life. It's the complete opposite of the downhill side, right? That there's not much that seems to be good in your life. Maybe you're fighting health issues. Maybe money's tight, job's shaky, relationships are on the rocks. It would be easy for you to abandon your faith. Because honestly, you might feel like God's abandoned you. Where's God for me in the midst of these troubles that I'm having to deal with? But the writer of Hebrews tells us, hey, don't take your eyes off Jesus. Don't abandon your faith. There's a great cloud of witnesses that would tell you, fix your eyes on Jesus. Not on the doctor, not on your bank statement, not on the it's not you, it's me text that you received. Fix your eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith, regardless of where you are in the race. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Not on your circumstances, not on the person that hurt you, but hold on to the Lord. Because God has something better planned for us. Hold on to the promise that he's given us. Now, the audience, the recipients of the letter to the Hebrews would have been really familiar with this analogy of racing. First the Greeks and then the Romans came along and basically copied everything the Greeks did. But the Greeks had athletic games, right? They had the Olympics. We can thank them for that. And then the Romans carried on the tradition. Here's a picture of what we would call a stadium. The top picture is how it looked back in the day, and then the bottom picture is today. And so the long oval that's kind of right in the middle of the picture is the track, really. Now, they raced chariots in there, but they also had running events as well. And so they lived in this time. They would have seen stadiums. In fact, when they do archaeology in most ancient Roman cities, there's usually a Colosseum, which is on the right-hand side there, and then a stadium where events were held, right? And that's someday, again, if Jesus didn't come back, when they excavate our cities, they'll find stadiums that we had athletic events in as well. Paul used the analogy of running as well. 20 years before this letter was written, Paul basically said the same thing in 1 Corinthians 9:24. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Notice what Paul's saying there. He doesn't say run the race to get the prize. He's saying run the race like you want to get the prize. Put some effort into it. Run the race. You know, I ran track my junior and senior year of high school because I moved to Duncan and they didn't have soccer there. So I thought, well, I've been running a lot, so maybe that translates, right? So I started off running the 440-yard dash. Many of you don't even know what that is because it doesn't exist anymore, okay? So running the 440-yard dash, spring of my senior year, we got a brand new track, and we also converted to the metric system. This is crazy. In 1980, in all of the United States, they converted from yards to meters in track. And so that was one of the reasons why we had to get a new track, because it was marked incorrectly. So we were confused, right? We converted to the metric system. Now I'm running the 400 meters. There's a new track with new lines on it. We're like, hey, where do I line up? Am I running further or shorter? Because it better not be longer, right? How do we know when to stop running? We were confused because it was the metric system. I still don't understand the metric system, right? So to make it worse, I got converted to run the 800 meters, which was brutal. I felt like it was twice as long as the 400 meters. I hated it. And the only reason why I did it was for the medals. If you ran track in high school or in college or whatever, you know this, right? If you finish in the top 3 places, you get a medal. And so I thought, if I'm going to be out here killing myself, I ought to at least get something for it. And so my whole aim was, let me finish in the top 3. I don't care what time I run. I don't care if I finish first. I just want a medal. I just wanted to place in the top 3. And you know, there's a theological equivalent to that attitude. It's, I'm going to do the bare minimum to get into heaven. I'm going to say a prayer, and maybe I walk the aisle, and I'm good. I don't need any discipleship. I don't need to grow in my faith. I'm good right there. And Paul is saying, are you kidding me? Run the race like you want to win. You may not win, but at least run it like you want to win. And so the writer of Hebrews takes that thought and says, yes, run the race that God has laid out for you. Run it like you want to win. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. And who are the witnesses? He told us, right? As you're running the race, you look up in the stands and you see Noah and Abraham and Enoch, right? They're all up there. They're cheering for you. They're shouting. They're saying, hey, throw off everything that hinders you and the sin that so easily entangles you and run with perseverance the race marked out for you. Run like you want to win. Throw off fear, busyness, complacency, laziness, and run. Run the race that God has laid out for you. You know, in our old location over on Brookside, a few of you will remember this, the Route 66 Marathon would go right down Peoria, right in front of our church there. And there were, I don't know, a handful of Sundays probably in the 6 years we were there, where we had people that were attending our Sunday service that also knew people that were running in the race. And so they would go out there to watch. Now, the way the Route 66 Marathon works is the fun run came first. And you knew it was the fun run because those people were actually having fun. They weren't suffering, right? They were just out there to have a good time. There were more tutus than at the Tulsa Ballet, okay? But they had a good time. So the fun run goes. Some people were out there cheering those runners on. But then the Paul runners came after that. The people who were running like they wanted to win the race. And every once in a while, you know, our folks would go out there and they'd tell their friends or family members, whoever was running the race, they said, hey, look for me. I'll be standing out in front of Hope Fellowship. I'll have a sign, but I'll be cheering you on. What an object lesson for us, right? Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, it's not just the people in the list that are in that great cloud of witnesses. It is people from your life, people that have spoken into your faith, people that have influenced your faith, people that have pointed you to Jesus, people that have gone on to be with the Lord. And they're there. They're saying, run Run your race. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Run like you want to win. For me, I look in the stands and there's my grandmother who didn't care where we went to church, just as long as we went to church. There's the two ladies from Hillcrest Heights Baptist Church in South Oklahoma City who prayed for me the night I gave my life to the Lord at Vacation Bible School. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture who's in the stands, who's cheering you on, who are the people who spoke into your life, and you're sitting here today because of them. They're there. They're cheering you on. They're saying, run the race that God has laid out for you. Fix your eyes on him. He will give you the strength to finish. Throw off everything that hinders you and the sin that so easily entangles you. Run with perseverance the race marked out for you, fixing your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of your faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Don't quit. Run. Don't walk. Don't get distracted. Run the race that God has laid out for you. Don't grow weary. Don't lose heart. Run like you want to win, because God has something better planned for you in the end. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness and your mercy. Lord, I pray that you would help us all to run, that we would run the race that you've put us in like we want to win, Lord. Father, if we've just been kind of coasting, if we've thought that this was a fun run and we've just kind of been goofing around, would you help us to see what's really playing out here, Lord, that we're a part of the story that you're writing, that how we live by faith is a part of the bigger picture, that it's not just about us, that because you're a good God, you have something better planned for us. It's not just what we see in front of us, Lord. So, Father, would you give us faith to live our lives that way? Lord, we just thank you for Jesus and for what was done on the cross, for the joy set before him. He went to the cross, knowing full well what was going to happen. Lord, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your mercy that you continue to pour out on us. It's in Jesus' name we pray.